Long ago, in a distant land, there lived a noble daimyo whose heart carried a deep and impassioned love for his bride. Words of their love was carried through the land as like the cherry blossoms lifted by a gentle wind. Even as the trees began to shed their bloom and the pale white blanket of snow adorned the land, their love blossomed like a sakura tree in spring. And just as it had been foretold, the day had come when his bride was to bear his child. But what blessings should come when it was found that she carried not one, but two within her womb. 2 daughters were born to them. And beloved they both were upon their births, but the elder was called Fuyuko, for her delicate features mirrored the frost-kissed petals of a winter rose. Yet, as fate often weaves its intricate tapestry, their joy had been overshadowed by their sorrow on that fateful day. For in the midst of such blessings, tragedy too can find its place. With the first breath of life their daughters took, their mother, the beloved bride of the noble daimyo, whispered her last farewell. The daimyo, stricken with grief, mourned the loss of his beloved as the winter winds whispered their mournful sorrow. For such was the way of the world in those ancient days, where beauty and sorrow walked hand in hand, as the fragile petals of life were carried on the winds of destiny. When the winter came, there was only beauty, but when it remained, there was only misery. This is the story of Fuyuko, the winter child. Years later, standing amidst a land painted in shades of frost and shadow, this winter child stood before a foe as deadly as the winter's bite, an assassin cloaked in darkness, bearing the weight of unseen sins in his eyes. He waited as Fuyuko unsheathed her sword. Her blade appeared against the muted sun, reflecting its subtle light, but still the assassin remained unmoved. The two were locked in silence as the snow settled gently around their feet. Fuyuko remained firm in her resolve, but the swift plumes of breath that left her lips could not deny her raging heart. Her opponent, however, was like the ice beneath their feet. Not until Fuyuko took the first step did the assassin thrust out his kunai, aiming it straight for her heart. But her blade was swift, and Fuyuko guarded herself against its path. The crash of metal echoed through the air, and just as she moved, the assassin swept in with his wakizashi to strike again. From that moment on, their meeting was not marked by words, but by the crash of blades that echoed through the silent landscape. Swift were their blows, intended only for the mark of death. One by one, their fates were tested, and each move carried their determination. But as her strength weakened, Fuyuko's prowess faltered against the assassin's relentless assault. Each strike was a tempest of fury, yet still was not enough to overcome the assassins. With a swift and calculated move, her opponent leaped forward, striking Fuyuko in her weakness. Now, wounded and vulnerable, Fuyuko faltered beneath the weight of her pain. Yet despite her apparent defeat, Fuyuko grasped a foreign dagger, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. And with a fierce resolve, she struck back, defying the grip of death for one final stand. Using his own blade against him, Fuyuko cut deeply into his flesh, revealing for the first time the strain in his stance. She took a breath to catch herself, but her attack was still not enough to slow her opponent. For just as she seized her moment to strike, so too did the assassin move to take back his claim on her life. Despite his wounds, her opponent moved with a defiant speed. She faltered, and the assassin caught her in her weakness. His blade pressed firmly against her porcelain skin, poised to claim her life. But before the fatal blow could fall, fate intervened in the guise of a Metsuke, a noble enforcer whose arrival stayed the assassin's final blow. With what strength remained in her body, Fuyuko broke free of his hold, and at last his claim on her life was thwarted. As the Metsuke swiftly made his approach, the assassin vanished into the wintry veil, leaving Fuyuko on the edge of eternity. She fell on the icy ground as the darkness began to shroud her eyes. But this mysterious man, this Metsuke, rushed to her, finding the source of impending death. Sensing the urgency of her state, he carried Fuyuko's fragile form to a nearby village. There, sought the help of someone who could tend to her wounds, finding more than what he bargained for. Finding refuge in an unlikely place, it was discovered that the woman had been cut with a blade dipped in poison, and such cure would not come easily. Far the mountains remained the only cure for her injuries, and time was quickly fading on Fuyuko's life. So, at last, the Metsuke embarked on his journey to find this cure, not knowing if his efforts would be in vain. Even still, this noble man left her side in search of hope. Leaving our Fuyuko in the care of his unlikely allies, the Metsuke left the dwelling to begin the journey. But as he stepped into the street, two figures emerged from behind the shadows. Watching his every move, two men approached him, their blades drawn by their side. Glancing back at the door he shut behind him, the Metsuke gently reached for his sword and confronted them on the road where they stood. The men, fierce in their gaze, drew closer to him as their grips tightened around their weapon. The woman, one said firmly. The woman is none of your concern, he replied as he finally removed his sword. And in that moment, three men stood at odds for the life of the injured princess. How did such a fate become our Fuyuko, when once a promise of hope and peace for the land, this woman, this winter child, had been lost to the hand of a cruel fate and a much uncertain imbalance?